every single topic, and we have these opportunities, so to speak, all the time. And I think that's one way of looking at this, that when you get conscious on a topic and knowledgeable, and then you decide that, well, this is part of my identity and my values, to really try to live those values, I think we become happier.
Yeah, I think so too. It becomes part of your identity to sense. But I also think that most people realize something or understand something on an intellectual level, but they don't change their behavior towards in any way. And this
is what I mean with deciding with your wallet to actually put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly.
And it's quite simple, because we have these choices all the time, and it's one thing to talk about it, it's a quite different thing to do it. I mean, like, and one example now is like, okay, is it really relevant to get an electrical car? Or you could argue, I've got one, you got one.
Yeah.
So you can argue, it's not CO2 neutral at all, blah, 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 or whatever it is. But I think fundamentally, we all can be part of shifting the fundamental mindset, culture, or dogma, so to speak, in a society. And it's that sort of compounding effect that really will count in the end.
Yeah. So the journey needs to start somewhere, and it's a bit the same like the AI journey. Now, the first model you deploy might not have a good return of investment in itself, but it's the first step on a journey.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that one thing is that technology grows exponentially. The speed of technology or the price of technology.
Kurzweil, right? Yeah. Kurzweil's law. Yeah.
And organizational change happens logarithmically, so really slow, and at a great cost. There is a great cost in organizational change or in behavior change at all, like we just talked about. And I think it's kind of the same. To change our behavior costs much more than intellectually realizing something. And now in the energy crisis we're in now, all of a sudden everyone wants to subsidize energy, which is crazy. It's not crazy to alleviate the economy of households. That's not what I mean. The crazy part is subsidizing something that there's a shortage of, because if you subsidize something with low supply, prices will just go up even more if you don't reduce consumption. So we need to subsidize, like not subsidize energy. We need to give money back in a way that's not connected to the consumption. And I think this is what decision science is, in a way, that to have some economical principles to your decisions and not create incentives for bad behavior.
What a perfect segue. I think I will use that as a segue to properly introduce you today, Rasmus, and it's so great to have you here. Rasmus Thornberg, Decision and Data Science Manager at Tetra Pak. We will unpack that title for sure. That's so interesting. We've known each other for a while. I think when we started, one of my first experiences when we started off this podcast, you came out and gave me feedback on something, and I said, I really want to talk to you and understand better, like, why did you like it or something like that. So remember that first conversation we had?
Definitely.
And it's like, we need to put the kids to bed and we should probably talk for 10 minutes, and I think we ended up having a conversation for almost an hour.
Definitely. It's probably
amazing.
more, yeah. And I remember one of the first episodes I was choosing between watching the latest episode of The Mandalorian or this podcast, and I decided to go for the podcast.
And now that makes me
just flattering us.
All right, flattering, but also But I'm sure you watched The Mandalorian after because it's awesome.
It's probably the best to come out of the Star Wars universe so far.
You liked it too, but so that was one thing. And then what I also has appreciated or realized that we are sharing a lot of ideas on how things work or why they don't work. The importance of community is things where we are thinking alike, and you have been taking a very active part in the Airplane Alliance, the community of peers where we sort of work on data and AI ready practices, between different companies, and that's been extremely valuable and useful and appreciated by in the meetups we've had and stuff like that. And so let's come back a little bit to that, but let's start a little bit. Who are you, Rasmus? To start from that angle.
Yes, I would say I'm not super interesting. I mean, so let's not spend too much time on that, but a little bit. So I was actually born here in Stockholm. Raised on Värmdö, but moved to Skåne when I was 5. And lived in Skåne from the age of 5, and now no one would be able to tell I have roots in Stockholm.
And I live at Värmdö now. Yeah. That's pretty funny. Whereabouts in Värmdö? I must ask you. Do you remember?
Rådjursstigen could it be?
Very close by to where I live.
Then my cousins moved into the house and lived there throughout, and it felt kind of strange to have your cousin living in my house. When you're a kid, you don't.
So you got to go back to Värmdö and visit your.
I did, but then they moved to central Stockholm or disappeared from Värmdö. But I'm happy to live in Skåne. I think it's a great part of Sweden, apart from the winters, which sucks, to be honest. But otherwise, I really like it down there.
And do you live close to Lund now?
I live in Lund.
You live in Lund?
I grew up in different places, but mostly in Rydbeck, south of Helsingborg, by the sea. So I lived by the sea all my life, and I spent my summers sailing. And now I have live in Lund, away from the sea, and it's strange still after 20 years living in Lund, not living by the sea. Yeah.
And then you did your university.
Yeah, in Lund. That's why I ended up there. So I decided on for the longest time I thought I would study chemistry, become a civil engineering chemistry or. Engineering chemistry, maybe it's called, until the 3rd grade in high school, gymnasiet. And then I stumbled upon organic chemistry and decided, no, this is not for me. And was a bit hesitant, what should I do now with my life? And so I decided to go for technical engineering physics, teknisk fysik. Because that didn't close any doors for me. And so I studied engineering physics in Lund. But I also studied philosophy and psychology on top of that.
Interesting combination.
Wish I've studied something, then it would be philosophy and psychology, actually. So, yeah, that's
not too late.
Yeah. It's not. Oh. But, yeah, interesting.
And I think it's been really helpful. Philosophy had a rumor of being a bit fluffy or hand-wavy, but I think it's the opposite. And it's been really helpful in structuring helping me structure thinking properly.
You have a favorite philosopher?
I have a few. I'm fairly fond of Bertrand Russell, even though he tried to spend half his career proving that 2 + 2 is 4.
I don't know him. Can you?
He's a British philosopher, but I don't want to go into details. It's been so long. I probably would end up saying something that's completely wrong. But also, it's where I start thinking about what we just talked about before, putting my money where my mouth is, while studying moral philosophy. And I mean, if you come to the point where you can't argue for what you do, you should stop doing it.
You should. I agree. But it's hard. It's
hard.
It's
hard
easy to say, hard to do in every facet.
Yeah.
So, and now, curious, when did you get onto the path of data science or data?
It's been a long and meandering route. I started out working in within quality, supplier quality in semiconductor manufacturing, and semiconductor manufacturing is a really data-driven industry. Probably the first adopters of statistical process control and understanding the data of their process properly and using it to guide decision making. And then we wanted to implement that. So that was when I was working at Sony Ericsson building mobile phones.
So was that one of the first jobs out of?
Yeah, that was my first job after university. And that was a great place to start your work life, because it was a very young, very ambitious, and very sophisticated workplace. I would say it was world class. At least the parts I saw. I haven't seen anything like it since, in terms of being professional and fast paced.
And what are you sort of reflecting on as like a difference to what you thought they were doing in a very professional and excellent way?
They were very early on being fact-based and data-driven, and also having a very early on in CSR, so corporate social responsibility thinking, and also making sure the supply base was taking care of the workers properly. So I've been, when I went and visited the suppliers, we always had a dual role. One where we checked out the production, but also how worker welfare. I remember checking out fire extinguishing equipment to make sure it worked, and it was in China, and things were missing, and we went to the dorms and checked out how they lived, and no one had ever done that before, and it caused big commotions. Kind of funny, but then Apple had a lot of problems in this era, right? Where workers committed suicide in the production line, not in the line, obviously, but in the
working
factory.
there,
Working there. So that felt very good to be that, but it also made me realize that there is a grayscale, right, where they don't live like we do, so we can't expect them to live like we do, but there's still a minimum standard that we can accept. So
you worked at Ericsson, and then then you have had like different roles that have been going more and more into data. You were with Aon, risk analyst over at Aon for a while, and then at Assa Abloy,
value engineering, and then while with systems engineering at the ESS.
Let's could we dig in a little bit to what is value analysis and value engineering? Because I think this is one of the topics that, as a methodology, has been around for quite a long time, but I think it's maybe more important than talked about in 2022 than I've heard it for many, many years. And I can quote Bill Schmarso, one of the guys I like to discuss and argue with on LinkedIn, and he has this storyline around, we need to go from value engineering to data engineering to analytics engineering and back again, and really pushing the whole idea that the whole community around data, and we need to really wake up and go value first. And what is that all about? So in this context, I've been now getting into value engineering and what it really means. So it's quite cool when you done that sort of as a role quite 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So what is it?
It's a systematic approach to value creation, and you can use it for products or processes or business processes or any context where you create value, and it's to figure out how do we increase value, and then value could be defined by function divided by cost. In a sense, so you can increase value by reducing cost. Increasing efficiency or redesigning a product to cost less but provide the same function without losing quality. So, and then the question is, what's quality?
And what is value?
And
right?
what's value?
Yes,
exactly.
exactly.
So,
But in essence here, there's a method, there's methodology to it here. So you have a structured approach to actually, as a framework, to sort out what is value and then sorting out.
Yeah, and it really comes down to having all the business stakeholder or the value stakeholders in this case involved. And if you can't have the customer in there, you need to have a proxy for the customer, a very strong voice of the customer in any such workshop or value identification session or whatever you would like to call it. And then you dissect the whole value chain or the product and figure out what is the function of this? How does this contribute to value? And if it doesn't contribute to value, you figure, can we remove it?
Yeah.
Or yes, it does have a value. Okay, then can we improve on that value? Can we increase the functionality?
So how do you decide what to prioritize then if you take a value engineering approach to it? Who decides, what's most potentially valuable? Is it that you listen to the stakeholders or who
no,
really?
You can't ask the stakeholder directly often because they are stuck in their reality.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Elon Musk and first principle thinking before. So let's soon come back to that. But you need to listen to what the business stakeholder says and they're very carefully. But you also need to guide them to describe the value. You need to help them to do critical thinking and arriving on the first principle of the value.
So I think this is the core, right? It's very easy to get stuck in your old ruts or dogma, whatever you want to call it. But if you have a structured approach to dissect with the right questioning techniques, to dissect all the way down to first principles, what is it that we're truly trying to, problem to solve? What is truly useful for the customer? So really, engineering, for the right amount of features for the right problem solving at the right cost.
Exactly, and to do that, you also you kind of need to understand your customer very well and their utility functions. In our case, where we are B2B, that's both a bit trickier and a bit easier, depending because you don't have that many customers, but they are very heterogeneous. So not all of them have the same utility functions when it comes to products or what's value for them. And
how do you think value engineering or this approach, how does this relate to, for instance, design thinking, service design? There's several different schools here that are trying to find a way to articulate what is the problem and what are we here to solve as a solution or as an offering or as a journey or whatever. Do you think they're related or do you think they're adding different perspectives to the same?
I think it's mainly looking at the same problem from different perspectives. It's the same goal, it's just different approaches. And if done right, it probably would come up with this very similar answer.
And I think this is, for me in my journey in 2022, And I can quote myself on the keynote Data Innovation Summit this year. I think I was standing there screaming, you know, I was a little bit busy and like that, but I remember screaming, value, 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 value. We all need to be better at value in the tech roles we do. So relating it back now to our community in AI and all that, I think this is one of the core topics, to be really good at extracting and defining, you know, what is the value, and ultimately then translating that into whatever we need in data and like that. So I think this is, for me, I think that's one of the missing pieces that we haven't been doing so well over the years. We've been very much enthusiastic with our tech, or, you know, as an industry. I don't know. How do you see this?
No, I totally agree. And I think that's an example of where Ericsson went wrong. They went for technology, right? Very technology focused instead of... and when I say Ericsson, I mean Sony Ericsson, in this case, mobile phone development. Great technology, great phones. But someone else came with the iPhone. And we said, that will never work. Those screens will break immediately. This is really hard to do properly. And we have investigated this technology thoroughly, and they will crack immediately. And they did, of course. And then we said, people will need to encase them in big rubber shells or something, and they did. and they were happy, because we didn't understand the value properly.
How do you keep that then? How do you actually... How are you able to invent things like the digital camera or the iPhone or these kind of more innovative solutions that it's not really possible to see the value of right now? Yeah.
And here I think value engineering is not the answer, because value engineering is an approach to a traditional methodology where you apply it to. And in order to take these discrete steps and being really innovative, it's hard for an old company like Tetra Pak, where I work now, or any old industry who's focused on it's called production excellence, or and being really efficient, and you marginally tweak the process. Don't want to do big changes because the return on investment will be very low. And instead, you end up becoming a fossil. In the case of Kodak, exactly. You said digital camera before. And the question is, how can you be both innovative and have this focus on efficiency, which you need to have as a big company, because otherwise you will bleed to death. And it's more like right-handed or left-handed. You need to be ambidextrous, but how do you get there?
Really hard, right?
Really hard, and it's a struggle. And being like, we started up the decision science team in Tetra Pak. We started up as an internal startup, and I think that's one of the ways to do it. Maybe not the only one, but you need to come in without the preconceptions of the industry and try to remake it from within, because I don't think it can be done from without, and it can't be done in the old structure.
So there are so many topics here.
Yeah, I'm so eager to just ask, how do you do innovation at Tetra Pak? But we haven't even come to.
No, so let's just wrap this up, because I think we're coming into some real meat, super good topics and fun topics. But I mean, so I think that part of Assa Abloy, I think there's something there that is really useful to have done. But I think also very interesting to highlight, value engineering is suitable in some context, but when you do want to do real innovation or leapfrogging of some kinds, there are other ways or other methods to consider,
like lean startup or
clean startup, and I'm gonna park this now, but we come into this whole first principle discussion, and we come into a favorite topic. I think I know with you, together with me, hypothesis-driven, hypothesis
Yes.
steering. Yeah, this is
Definitely.
interesting, right? And this is also a big shift for the old company, right?
Yeah.
But so parking a couple of interesting topics here. But here you had a career, and then you worked in a couple of different consultancies for
Yes.
a while. How would you say that was different to you experiencing being in like Assa Abloy or E.ON and Sony, and then working in a consultancy?
Both super liberating and super frustrating.
Good one. Elaborate, please.
Yes. So it felt so good to be able to concentrate on a focused topic. You had a very clear task to solve, a project. Yeah, a project. And you could just do it without the overhead of being in a big company. And you got happy stakeholders or customers when you delivered something good, and hopefully in a better time than they expected. And the connection with value was very clear then, and you saw impact immediately. But the frustrating part is that you then left your baby, and you didn't know if it was used or at all. So you actually just assumed the impact. You had to assume the impact of what you did. Otherwise you wouldn't make it. Or at least not mine. I really need to see the impact of what I do.
And is that one of the reasons in the end that you sort of went from consulting firms and started at Tetra Pak?
Yes, because I really missed being involved in the strategic decision making and strategizing, but also
seeing things through
and having the holistic view of the problem. Because as a consultant, you're again a feature delivery person or feature delivery team. Someone else come up with a solution for you to build, and then you can build something within that framework. But that's not how you create value. Delivering features that you then leave and someone else takes over who doesn't really understand it. You need to. Marty Kagan says we need to have missionaries, not mercenaries.
I love that, and I need to connect you with Mikael Klingvall at Derdax, because we had today this conversation around the difference of the cycle of, from value execution. This is, we have a product and we execute on this value, and this is where value engineering fits in, executing on the value we know. And then we get into more value creation, so thinking up something new, creating new values. And in the end, you can do a project where you have created value, but then you need to move into value capture, capitalization. So the core topic here is like we've done it, an algorithm or a model. In theory, it's great, but it's not worth any money yet until you're capturing that or capitalizing on that model, and therefore re-engineering the core process of the people that are supposed to use it, even if it's the end customer or the internal customer. So for me, that's the same, as a consultant, you're very hard to get all the way into the value capture part.
Yeah. Within Tetra Pak, we call it continuous value. You need to get into continuous value mode.
I love it. I love that term, continuous value mode. And so do you remember sort of how was the recruitment into Tetra Pak? How did that happen? How did you get in there?
I got a call. Actually, I was in a recruitment process for a different for McKinsey. I think it was. I don't remember, but I realized that won't work for me in my family situation, even though I was tempted at the time. But I then said, no, this won't work for me. And then they said, but we also had this other role at Tetra Pak. Could that be interesting? Oh. So then he connected me with my current manager, Alberto Barroso. And that kind of clicked. So...
okay, so let's just now frame Tetra Pak a couple of minutes. What is Tetra Pak as a company? We know it, of course, as one of the crown jewels in Sweden, as an industrial global company. But how would you? What is Tetra Pak as a company?
Well, first of all, we have the main business, which is the packaging business. But when there is also a food processing part, where with a lot of food processing equipment, and then of course there is the service part. But the processing part of the business is also world class. For example, we have at least 50% of the ice cream market in the world.
Oh, really?
So when you buy a Magnum, the stick that says Magnum, that's a Tetra Pak product.
So basically what you're saying is that the packaging business, as I understand it, is that you, in a sense, sell industrial setups or plants for packaging that someone will use as part of their production for a product.
So we build full dairies or juice production facilities or crushed tomato production facilities.
So not only the packaging, but the whole
factory. We greenfield projects. So someone calls us, design a factory for us and build it. And
so literally raw material is tomatoes here, and then coming to the door into the factory you have built, and out comes the Tetra Pak with crushed tomatoes.
Or tomato sauce, or
so it's actually a lot of processing going on here, not only packaging.
I would say that the processing parts, it's in value it's not as big, but we are huge on a global basis in the full processing equipment part as well.
Yeah. Because it's easy to understand Tetra Pak from afar. That they are the guys with the triangular
package.
That, I think it's called the classical Tetra Pak, the old Festis or the old milk.
And that's the basis of the name of Tetra Pak for tetroid.
And then not realizing, no, that's just one part of the whole story here.
But a very important part as well. I mean, and the mission of Tetra Pak is to provide safe food everywhere.
Ooh, good one.
And in many senses, we're a value-driven company, but following your values is sometimes hard. Because we have a global presence, obviously, and now with the war in Russia, we have a dilemma that our values of providing safe food clashes with the values of standing up against oppression and boycotting Russia. So for example, is it fair for babies not to receive safely packaged food? Just because the leadership have decided to go to war with another country, it's not an obvious choice to divest in Russia, which we have done now. But
you took a lot of heat for being slow on that decision. I remember that.
But
it's a hard one. It's a very hard one.
Because again, it's being value driven and having a mission to deliver safe food for everyone. That seems like an easy thing to do, right? Without any consequences, but it does have. But I think it's important to be value driven.
But let's dive in a little bit, like to how does data science or analytics or AI machine learning manifest itself at Tetra Pak? Like, what is it? What typically is this all about for Tetra Pak?
I will speak mostly for my division, the decision science team. We have other data scientists working within Tetra Pak, within automation or within
So there are different use cases in different parts of different problems with data science, but you're working in one of them.
Yeah, I'm working with one of them. And I would say the biggest one, but it's not the only one. And our mission is to improve decision making with the help of data. And improving decision making is very wide. So it means both innovating with the business processes, but it also means optimizing our customers' production processes, because that's also decision based. You decide on how to set your production, and a decision really comes down to a choice. You need to make a couple of choices to optimize an outcome, and that's what we mean by decision science.
So was this a conscious choice to talk about decision science versus data science?
Yes, and we started out as the Data Science Center of Excellence, like very generic term for an internal startup group. But we quickly realized that in order to get to value, we need to focus on decision making, because it's the decision making that creates value. It's information doesn't create value, and I would say it's decision followed by action that creates value, right? So we really focus on doing prescriptive analytics and not only providing a descriptive or forecasting, predictive analytics. It's not always, that clear cut, but we have that as our vision to always get to the prescriptive parts of optimizing decision making.
So would you say that data science, at least in your team, is mainly focused on more BI purposes, or is it also being used like in products itself, or is it mainly BI?
No, I would say neither. Because, BI maybe in its broadest sense, but BI tends to be about descriptive and talking about what was, while we try to be forward-looking and saying, given the trends we see, what is our best options? What should we decide?
But it's basically helping the decision makers, at least,
yes,
what decision to take from a more company overall perspective in some sense.
I would say that's our major focus right now, and that's where the majority of continuous value comes from.
But I think this is also interesting because, of course, now you have different teams who are using algorithms in different purposes. So you highlighted as there was another team that's working on automation type topics. And here we have another type of machine learning and AI coming into sort of monitoring and making automated operational decisions in the production flow. And, you're incorporating algorithms into your core products you sell, so to speak, in building a plant and stuff like that. But that's a different. That's not where you are, so to speak.
Yes, we do dabble in production optimization, but
production as in manufacturing, or
no, our customers' production. Oh. So we have cases where we're trying to help our customer to optimize yield based on input. So they get more predictable outcomes and more better quality outcomes as well.
Yeah, maybe explain yield, because that's that's obvious for you and for the ones who knows production, but not for everyone.
So based on how much you put in, you maximize the amount you get out of the process.
Yeah, so we can talk about we should have 100 units produced out of this raw material. We only get 90 because we have so much faulty. So we need to improve our yield.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and your customers in this case is what?
In this case, it's a dairy kind of. I don't want to discuss this specific project, but it's in the dairy space.
Yeah.
So if we take, I'm not saying there are customers, but I'll take example customers. What it could be in Sweden, we have a dairy producer. The name is Arla in Sweden. Yeah. We all drink Arla milk. They have massive manufacturing plants, of course, to produce that milk and to ship it and all that into our stores. And potentially they could use Tetra Pak production value chain or production setup in there. And ultimately then when we're talking about yield is in relation to food processing here.
Yeah.
Is that a summary?
Yes, Yes, it's good summary. And in this case, there is also yield loss in terms of aseptic performance. I mean, bacteria or something starting growing within the product. And that's also something we look into, how to increase our aseptic performance by optimizing cleaning cycles or other production parameters.
So I think Tetra Pak in this way is super interesting, because there are many things here that sort of sometimes we forget how much data and data science there is in large scale B2B type business. It's so easy to talk about the Spotify cases or the Klarna cases where it's sort of, it's operational and it's happening with a simple to grasp one consumer. And here we're talking about industrial scale selling of big manufacturing plants, and you have sales cycles for maybe years, all this, right?
Multiple years.
And then basically how to work with data and data-driven approaches in this context is equally relevant, but it's not the same.
No, it's definitely not the same. I would argue it's much harder, but very important, because, as I said, we have less customer, but more heterogeneous customers, meaning you can't apply the same solution to everything. So you really need to understand your business domain or customer domain, and not treat all your customer equally. That is, of course, how we tend to act, especially in old businesses. We come up with a standardized strategy or a way of working, and we say every customer is equally important or things like that. But being really customer focused is treating customers differently, not that every customer is the king.
And let's go into this a little bit, because this has been on my mind for years. I think it's easy, okay, entry point into the topic. Why is it Facebook or companies like that are at the cutting edge frontier of using AI and machine learning on really large scale and operational? And I heard someone, I'm going to test this with you now, arguing that, one of the things that make that possible is that the fundamental data model around a customer, or if I take Spotify, it's fairly framed compared to when you go into some type of multi-agent system, like building a full production plant. Or I talk about one example is Boliden, or mining, and looking at a mine as a system. Like the ontology of this and the understanding of that is used mind-blowingly much harder. So therefore, it's been really hard to start understanding how can we learn from the cutting edge, and how can we now thinking about applying that with the same goal of outcomes, I think, but the route there is quite different. I mean, so I've been thinking about the B2B versus direct to consumer and all that. There is sort of we can learn so much from each other, but it's also very different.
Yes, definitely. So a concept like customer lifetime value, very different, right? In the B2C and the B2B space.
Yeah.
That's something we haven't cracked yet, but because of the heterogeneity of our customer base, we have all from small dairies in Brazil to Oatly or Arla here in Sweden, or Coca-Cola, to go even bigger. Those are not the same kind of they don't have the same kind of business problems, almost, even though they work in the same business space. Obviously.
So what has been your journey to think about data science and in this B2B context? How have you sort of gone into it? I think.
So what we try to do is we try to go for the value, right? Figure out where is the value, and by understanding our business models and understanding where we have waste in terms of stock, lying around, safety stock optimization costs a lot, obviously, but also production optimization, production planning, I should say. As you said, we have very long sales cycles. So that means we have a very costly sales cycle. We spend a lot of money in pre-sales, with pre-sales engineers designing plans and stuff, with the expectation of selling, but not a guarantee. And then if we want to make a lot of bets, we need to quantify those bets in order to improve decision making, and that's something we have been working a lot with. Quantifying the sales bets, for example, by understanding the probability of selling and the time to sell and stuff like that.
So I think what we are saying here is go back to understanding where is the waste, where is the value, where is what problem is useful enough to solve, so to speak, and then start applying data science, understanding what are data science or data related questions here that we can basically improve what we can do here.
Yeah.
And then you dissect, uncover, peel.
Exactly, and it goes back to first principle thinking again. And trying to figure out not how we work, but how could we work if we had better information, and how could we then take better decisions than we do today. So we try to both do the small gradual improvements, but also the big innovative steps.
And elaborate a little bit like how you see first principle thinking in this context now, because I think this is really...
So going back to the sales process, that could mean that, to really understand what is the basic principle of a sales opportunity, what are the components, or where are the uncertainties in that sales process, and where do we spend time in the sales process? How is the cost distributed throughout that, and how can we do that differently? Instead of looking how do we actually do it today, but I realize I am not very clear now. but it's
But let me try. At a lunch, me and Goran, help me out here a little bit, Goran. And we were talking actually. So this is a general B2B sales realization, where I think what you're onto is first principles. So we said like, okay, customer X has been super successful selling something of quite large magnitude to customer A. So, supplier X to customer A. And then we realized, well, what was the context of this situation when this sale went through? And then Goran, you made a very good analogy. You were talking about like a chemist major, if you set up an experiment, and you need to basically...
I thought you were talking about today, so I was wondering, like, when did we spoke about...
No, this is a couple of weeks back. So the interesting thing is, like, if you have a chemical experiment and you want to reproduce that success, you need to control your environment. You need to understand what is the context where this chemistry experiment will work. So I think you made it really sharp, this analogy, like, what is the environment where these complex sales will take place now, and what are the ingredients in the environment where this will work or not work?
So basically the discussion was like, okay, if you have successfully made a sale of a product or a service, the first one, right? And now you want to duplicate that success. The chances of you succeeding with that sale will be if you have a similar environment where the buyer is the same, the challenge of the person is the same, the objective of the person is the same, and the hinder of the person is the same. And then comes the budget, decision making, and etc. So the chances of you duplicating the success is like an experiment, right? You have successfully done it once. Let's say in chemistry that would be pressure, temperature, quantity of items, and etc. It's the same thing in sales, right? So more times you execute the same type of experiment, more successful you are. And then when you are successful in that, you can actually start in removing some of those or adding other materials or maybe hiring the temperature and etc., whatever it is. Therefore, you can be successful in creating other opportunities. But the analogy was that in order for you to duplicate a success, easiest is to find the same environment as the first cell.
And this is how I now, what this is linking back to the conversation now and doing decision science on this is a little bit like, well, you can start if you start understanding the environment and what is the decision criteria, what is the qualification model, so to speak, of this B2B sales opportunity, you know that certain things need to have happened and be in place for this to have a chance to succeed. So I think you can talk about life expectancy of this deal and stuff like this, right?
Exactly.
Because you see, well, you haven't given you haven't got the sponsor, you haven't got a clear budget decision. There's fundamentals of survival for this organism, the deal. So the life expectancy of this deal is quite low right now. Is that
Right.
a fair?
Yeah, it is. And you can also say, we have seen that if it doesn't evolve, there is nothing happening with the sales, the probability of it surviving goes down.
It's freshness, right? It's fresh
Right.
milk. Deals are like milk. They need to be fresh.
Longer shelf life, though.
3 years.
But yes, and also coming back to then why do we need the help of machines to do this? Because machine learning, ML or statistical models are less prone to be biased or noisy. Because if you read Kahneman, you know definitely knows about cognitive biases, which, I mean, humans are really bad decision machines in most cases. In situations where we are familiar or have some kind of expertise, we can be really good and have heuristics for handling situations. But in new situations situation that doesn't happen often enough for us to learn, we will never develop expertise. And thus, our gut feeling will not be aiding us in our decision making. Using models, even though they are based on what you already know, they will be much less likely to have a bias, because that can be easily controlled and removed from the process, from the model. But also it's less likely to have a noise in the context of you are not taking the same decision on 1 week after another, even though the context is exactly the same. So, or in the case of Goran's customer, exactly the same circumstances, and the customer could take a different decision because he woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And that's more decision noise, which haven't been talked about so much now, but yet. But I see this as a big topic coming up since Kahneman now wrote a book called Noise, which is excellent, and everyone should read it.
Yeah, so he's type 1, type 2 thinking fast, thinking slow was his first book, and now he has Noise.
Noise, yeah, and I think Thinking Fast and Slow was a huge hit, but to be honest, it's a bit hard to read because he wrote it alone, I think. Anyway, he didn't have the same help he have now in Noise, which he learned from the first book. So it's much easier to digest, and it's just as important for decision makers to understand, or everyone who works in this space needs to understand the concepts of noise a different kind of decision noise and different kind of decision biases.
So how would you describe it? What is the core message of noise?
Use machine learning.
But is that the only way? I mean, there must be situations where machines are good,
yes,
and also bad, and the same with humans, right?
A typical example where humans can outperform machines is if you're trying to predict an outlier. Humans are much better at understanding how an outlier will act or take decision around uncommon cases. For example, if I were to predict if Henrik is going to the movie tonight, I could probably build a statistical model based on that. But if you know he has broken leg, you have information that's really important that the model will never be able to take into account, or never. But that kind of things you as human need to override the machine learning model. But if you use the machine learning model as a baseline for decision making, and then you take broken legs into account and override.
So the conclusion basically is that you should combine machines and humans together?
Yes, definitely. And another example is today with driving here. I used Google Maps to guide me. And most of the way I didn't use it because I felt confident on driving. But coming into Stockholm, I realized I'm lost without this decision help I have. And but I had to override it to because of road work that wasn't on the map, and I took a different route.
So if you were to try to, I mean, we've spoken about this a bit before, but what are really, do you have a nice way to frame just what are machines good at and what are humans good at? I have my favorite way to describe it, but do you have a favorite way?
I think I would say machines are good at all the common cases. So if you have something that repeats, use a machine for it. If it's just one-offs or outliers, use your human decision-making skills. Of course, there's also a cost benefit analysis to make. I mean, most decisions are not that important. We make millions of decisions, and most of them doesn't count at all. And for those, you use your heuristics.
Could we dive a little bit deeper on? So now in this type of decision science, what techniques are we talking about, both statistical and technically, and what's the math or what's the systems behind here? What are you doing concretely?
So first of all, in order to build a machine learning model, you need a record of historical decision making, and that's where the problem starts. Because Tetra Pak, like many other companies, don't record their decision making. They record results or outcomes. But unless you know the information at the point of the decision, so the available information at the decision time and the decision taken, it's really hard to build a model based on that. So many examples of models, decision-making models, are based on well-documented decisions, like court cases, where a lot of data is available and the decision is documented. But in business, that it doesn't work like that. At least
so you
not
had
yet.
to start building up your win-loss.
Exactly.
I mean, as an example, if a company has been doing very elaborate win-loss analysis or been capturing this data, this is a huge benefit.
Yeah, that's a gold mine.
Yeah.
And again, people say data is the new oil. I don't really agree, because oil have a high potential value always, right? Or at least still. I think it's more like data is new ground where sometimes you can dig into it and find gold. Sometimes it's just dirt, and that also has uses. But you need to find the right use for the right data. And what I'm talking about is having a data-centric approach, because modeling isn't. It's just a tool for finding patterns. It's the data that's important. We need to collect the right data for the right problems.
I like that you actually debunk, the horrible metaphor of data is a new oil, because I think it's wrong for so many reasons, and one of them is what you said. Data is certainly not always good or useful, but also oil is, for one, really bad for our environment. Data is not necessarily so.
No.
Oil is finite, and data is not, right? So I think it's a really horrible metaphor, if I say so.
I agree. We need to come up with a better one.
Yes.
So why it's not a good metaphor again?
Because there's so many wrong things with it. I mean,
Yeah,
for one,
but the first one that you mentioned, if that was not the oil, we would not be entering the industrial age, right? It would be much harder to do this on a boiling water.
It was an excellent energy source until we used it too much.
It made its purpose. It was a part of innovation. And the second one, what was the second one?
I mean, it's many things. For one, it's bad for our climate, which is not necessarily, and it's finite, and it's also sometimes bad, as you said. Data, if you compare it to the ground, as you say, that's more, I think, apt and more correct. And I think the data is a new electricity is actually more proper. And can be.
But let me argue on this one a little bit.
My background is a chemical engineering, right?
Okay.
And you can do so many stuff with the oil, right? Yeah. You take the oil, it's not clean, it's dirty. There are so many things in that oil. So first you need to clean it, data mining, data cleaning.
Yeah.
Then you decide what you want to do with it. Do you want to do a petroleum? Do you want to do benzene? Do you want to do kerosene? Do you want to do plastic? Do you want to do rubber? Do you want to do... And then basically you optimize the entire to excellence. So in the end, when you're done with the 1 kilo of oil, you have left zero, right, of other stuff. Now, in contrary to what I said right now, if I have to say, then we had this discussion also on the same lunch with Henrik. The problem with the oil is that when you have taken 1 liter of crude oil and you have transformed it to something, you cannot take it back. The data, it's basically when it comes, it can stay, it can be kept as a metadata, as a master data, raw data, and etc. So you can repurpose it. So from that analogy, yes, I would agree. But I think that oil was a very good analogy at the beginning, because you had the refinery, you had the transportation of the data, you had usage, you had like a sales point, you had like a Statoils, you had everything around it, which was basically everything from collection to distribution to selling to usage to repurposing.
You need to say the same about electricity then, and that would be much more. You cannot say
like data is like electricity.
You can, and people have.
Yeah, of course.
Let me have a completely different angle on data is the new oil. And I actually used that myself very loosely, and then someone else used it. So I first of all, I agree that to work with data as the new oil in its full literal sense, I see a lot of problems with that, as you pointed out, Anders. But one argument I heard is, well, when it was used originally, and in The Economist 5-6 years back, they were not referring to data as the new oil in its literal sense. So it's been completely wrong. The argument that you have is then the one put forward. Let me finish. So the whole argument comes about of understanding the economical shift of power that happened in the economy with the Rockefeller era, and they coming in and dominating the world. So when we say data is the new oil in the sense it was mentioned in The Economist, and that I've been argued by guys like Bill Schmarzo, it's from an economical sense, and it's actually a description of the AI divide. It's a description of what happens when the very few has the resources, has the raw material at their disposal that all the rest of the world is needing. So in that sense, data is the new oil for me is for me to understand the fundamental economical impact that data has and how much we can learn from the industrial era and how oil created wars, how oil created this divide in the world between the haves and not haves, and between the exploited and the exploiters. So for me, data as the new oil is actually an economic. For me, I understand it from an economical sense.
I see what you mean, and of course, it's not a horrible analogy, but I think there are better ones. But of course, you can find similarities between them.
I mean, someone said data is the new sun. Maybe data is the new sun. I mean, but I think people have misunderstood.
That is
and
actually
misused.
better than the electricity, because how the electricity is coming. So where is it coming from? How do you use it? Transportation.
You have to find a way to find data as well. And you need to find
but
ways
for
to
me,
use electricity.
It's the fundamental understanding.
You cannot peel it down. You cannot make different things with it, right? I mean, you can transform it, but the oil is great because it's dirty. You clean it. The same is the dirt. In the dirt, you have gold. You have like clay. You have like dolomites and all of this other stuff.
But it's the fundamental flaw to me with data is the new oil, is that data has the unique feature of it is appreciating in value if you do it right. So it's one of the few raw materials that appreciate if you do it right. I mean, like if you know more and more, and if you're grooming your data and you add more to it, it appreciates in value. Like if you have many different raw data that you have in no context, in no meaning, has little value. If you put it together, it has more value potentially, right? So it's an infinite resource that is
infinite, but
not infinite.
If you're speaking about oil, or you're speaking about
data.
Okay.
So data. So the real flawed argument with oil is that it's not appreciating in value in the same way.
Sure.
But I think there is something to what you said, that oil was the motor of the industrial revolution, or even coal before it. Yeah. I think coal was even a bigger shift than the oil was, but coal was maybe more readily available globally, and didn't lead to centralization like the Rockefeller era. But I also think, what oil did is it replaced human work, from manual work. You could turn oil into manual work, and we can turn data into cognitive work. In a sense.
So for me, the data is the new oil needs to be understood in this context of economics that we said, and then how the oil was part of the automation of muscle power and data in the new era is a new economical factor that is about automation of brain power. So so I think there are things here that I don't think. You cannot literally use it. I don't like that. I agree with Anders, in fact. I quite hate it. But if you think about it from a macro perspective and discuss this on a macro perspective, there's a hell of a lot to be learned around the AI divide and what the hell we are doing now. That is quite concerning, that people are not really understanding what is happening around them. That's my take on this.
I'm sure. There are good examples and analogies you can make. I still think electricity had a much bigger impact on our industry than oil had, but we can argue that later, perhaps.
You can do electricity out of oil.
Yeah.
Yes.
You cannot do oil out of electricity.
Yeah,
which is good,
can
right?
actually,
because you don't want to have oil. Right?
Why not?
You could potentially compress things with electricity to actually produce oil.
Just because it's wrong right now, it was right 100 years ago, 200 years ago, right?
All right.
This is more of an after work.
So we are moving into some general topics here, and I think there is a segue here, some in between topics before we go down to all the macro perspectives. I would like to get your view on how do you understand the critical success factors and blockers around succeeding with data science in an enterprise setting?
This is the big question. When you have the answer, come back to me. But let me try to answer it as well. I had a conversation with Sumil Gupta, who's been on the show, around really need. I mean, we use the crisp DM as a process for starting our projects. And it starts with business understanding and data understanding step. And I think this is really core. Regardless of how you work, you need to really understand your problem and what your assets are in order to be able to solve the problem. And in order to build a model, you only need to understand maybe the decision challenge we're looking at. But in order to be successful then in implementing it, you need to understand the business context. And you also need to understand the more commercial context. So you need to start by framing the commercial context, focusing then on the business context, and then zooming in on the decision context. And then you can start thinking about, do I understand the problem properly? And do I have data to address this problem? And then we have a basis for building something. I think.
So this critical success factor number one is you need to actually zoom out quite a bit in order to really get it right.
Quite a bit, yeah. And I think Sumil have put this really well by focusing on the big commercial framing of it.
And I could then translate that critical success factors to one of our main issues and problems and blockers, because not only always are we expected, have the mandate or have the starting point to be able to drive it the way we want to do it. So we are sort of forced in to be pigeonholed to solve something here when we actually know we should start in a different way.
Exactly. So what often happens is that someone have a solution to a problem. They want me to deliver the solution to their problem. This is the solution that it's a gradual improvement on what we're already doing. But if you don't zoom out and ask, what is the actual problem we're trying to optimize? We will never get to the real core of value.
And then, just following the same argument, so now in order to frame the problem correctly, we have gone down this funnel, so to speak. Now in order to now we have built something that is sort of working here. Now the same problem remains to funnel out again to get to value capture. So just because you have the right model, how do I make the right model into the right decision, into the right action, into the right result, where this now needs to be placed back in the business context, in the broader commercial context, right?
Right. And often it's the case that the business don't have the bandwidth to understand what you have built for them, because they are stuck in their current context and
Could we be a bit more concrete? For me, as a non-business person, it would be fun to just hear, what really do you mean the difference are between commercial context and business context and decision context, etc.
Yeah. So by commercial context, I mean the wider world in the.
Could we have some example, perhaps some concrete example that you can speak about that to just make it a bit more clear?
Yeah, let's say cheese production. There is commercial context where how people buy cheese, how cheese is produced, and how Tetra Pak then provides value to the cheese manufacturer, and what kind of problems are we solving for the cheese manufacturer today, and how can we commercialize it or monetize our solutions, get paid for what we do, basically. Right. And then the business context is more internally looking within our organization. Are we set up properly to address or build something for our customer that we can sell? Do we have a business model for selling outcome-based services, for
business
example?
Model, isn't that based on the commercial aspect? Is it more about how much work it would require you as a business to make this service or product work?
It's could be that as well, yes. But I think it's more like for me, the business context is more like Conway's law, that you end up shipping your organizational chart while the customer are not very interested in your organizational charts. So we need to figure out how to maneuver within the business context.
Then you mean inside the company?
Yeah, inside the company.
So let me help you here, because I had deep discussions on these topics with Somil as well, and we actually did an engagement with Grundfos on exactly these topics, where the core example is a new innovation, cooling as a service. So basically, cooling is a major problem, and basically actually amounts to a lot of CO2 right now. So if we can optimize coolings in buildings, it's a huge effort, and Grundfos is genius that have figured out a way to do that without changing the infrastructure of cooling towers, but optimize how you operate it. Okay, so the commercial context now is basically, we can understand a problem, we can reduce CO2, and we can reduce so many things, and we can make it cheaper for you. So now we have a commercial thing that flies on paper, right? And typically now you go in and you work with some consultants, or you work in your innovation, and you start structuring, and you call it a business model canvas. So the first attempt to understand the world life problem and how you can sort of understand the very general context of this is some sort of high-fly business model canvas, you can call it. It's like a methodology tool to understand what are the core dimensions of this business. Now, here we have some sort of, from the commercial context of cooling as a service, as an idea, that really flies in theory, to the high-level paper, sort of like what it could be. Now comes the real work. How do I operationalize an operating model? Someone producing the right product, someone producing the right tech, someone putting the right pricing in place, someone putting the right distribution in place, someone putting the right marketing in place, someone putting the right sales in place. And ultimately now you get into the business context for this commercial cooling as a service innovative idea that looks fucking awesome on paper to become reality, to in the end be something we can capitalize on. Well, this is the business model context, and it's Pandora's box, because you can go wrong in one of those things and it fucks up the whole thing. Your pricing is wrong, your marketing is wrong, your sales is wrong, your product is wrong, your order to cash is wrong, And then here, in all of this, someone has asked you, I want a decision model for pricing, without considering how all these things are interlinked in the business context. So here I think it's, if you're a data scientist and you know that world really well, what happens when you put it into the real world? You have the enterprise operating model world. How will this actually be worked? And then ultimately you need to go all the way to the customer. How will he buy this? How will he use this? And this becomes, if I take Spotify as a very clear product, as an app, as a subscription, it's quite, I can grasp it. If you go into selling a manufacturing plant, it's so many loose ends, sort of thing, so many different things. So I think in the B2B context of the operating model, the business model, and the commercial context is super complex. And if you are not really careful what you're doing here, this is scary shit to build decision models if you don't understand how they will end up in the bigger picture. So it's very much a B2B, this explodes in complexity. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it sounds like the business context is more about designing the solution rather than, compared to
it's also about
model.
handling all the internal constraints that your organization have put in place. So you have the commercial framing maybe is about seeing the opportunity, and the business is
the
more
business
about
model as well. Isn't the business model really in the commercial setting?
Maybe it is. It's probably somewhere in between there. And I think again, there's probably some you can find this in different way. The whole point is you need to start really holistically and looking at the whole picture before you try to start solving the problem.
You identify some opportunity. You try to find, how would a solution potentially be built? Not building it, but designing some kind of potential solution for your business, and thinking about all the dependencies and how much work it would mean and how much it would cost and what you can sell it for, etc. And then finally you go more into implementing that, right?
Right.
But let me. I think that if I understand the problem, the way that happens is like someone comes and wants a decision model, and unfortunately hasn't taken in the whole business model situation.
What is a decision model?
Yeah, let's go there soon. Let's just park that one. We're going to go there.
Okay.
But so he wants something that helps him make decisions for something, right? And he's doing it with his own frame of mind. Like he maybe works in one function in a company that is doing something and it will help him. But he hasn't really maybe taken in all the different other functions and aspects of, so it's very easy you sub-optimize something by only looking at this without looking at the whole thing. So typically, if you fly in too fast on one small area of the problem, maybe it can work sometimes, but it's also a risk here that you're not solving or you're not doing the right thing. That's what I see a little bit with this.
Yeah. And if you don't know who the right business stakeholders are, for example, if you address the wrong stakeholders, you address the wrong problems, and you end up building a solution that's not fit for purpose, or at least you will have a much harder job getting to continuous value, because it won't be implemented because of internal structures or external factors.
Yeah. But I think a follow-on question that Anders, let's go there straight away. So we are now talking about decision science.
Yes.
And we are talking about and throwing out the word decision modeling. And maybe we need to put some definition and view what is that. How can we talk about a data model versus an analytical model versus a decision model? Can we sort of unpack this a little bit?
So basically a decision, there is a concept called decision quality that I use as a concept, and it includes different dimension of decision making that needs to be in place in order to make a good decision, because the decision will only be as good as its weakest link. And part of this decision making is to understand what information is needed, what is all the information we need in order to make a decision. And this is where data science normally comes in. We build a forecast, we build a pricing model or something like that, that gives you a information about something. But you also, of course, you need to understand the context, but you also need to understand which are the action that follows on your decision and what is the cost of those different decisions. So what's the cost of your several different choices or just two choices? And then what is the benefit of the outcome and what's the probability of reaching that outcome? And unless you understand this whole thing, you can't optimize the decision. But in many cases, we only provide a part of the information needed for decision making. And then it's not a decision model, then it's just a forecast or a prediction of some kind. But unless you can turn that prediction into a suggested decision, it's not a decision model. So you need to go from predictive to prescriptive, and you can only go to prescriptive if you understand the utility function of the different options and costs.
Could you also try to exemplify that a bit, perhaps? It's sometimes I feel like we were overcomplicating things.
Yes.
And just trying to understand some simple thing, something that we want to make a decision about, and just try to concretely speak about that. Could you think about such an example?
Say automatic driving.
Yes. Autonomous driving.
Autonomous driving, exactly. Then, what is the relevant information that you need to understand in order to make a decision? You need to understand what's in front of you, what's road, what's not road, what's the different lanes, and where are you going, so on. So then you need to build systems to tell you that. You need to understand from computer vision maybe where's the road, how far in front of you is the car, do we need a leader or not? And then we have the model of the map that we map against, so we know where we're going, where we want to go. And then there is a consequence of taking one road or another in terms of time, maybe, or in terms of minimize. You can minimize in time, or you can minimize energy consumption.
Utility function.
Utility function, exactly. And then, of course, you don't want to drive off the road, right? Because that has a very bad utility function. Or you have a car in front of you that you don't want to drive into. But maybe if they brake, suddenly what you need to make a quick decision about, do I brake or do I drive past?
I think that's a great example. How can we map these kind of concepts that you spoke about into this example then?
Yeah, so the context is pretty clear here. We described we have our options of braking, gassing, turning left or right, or
it's basically it, right?
Yeah. And then you just if you know your options, you know the cost of the options. Maybe the costs aren't that different in terms of cost of braking is maybe what we could say you lose energy if you brake. But knowing all this, you have a model of the world outside, and then you can optimize your choices.
So what is a decision model in this case? What is a data model in this case? What are the concepts that we spoke about before in this specific example?
I would say a forecast is maybe how far in front of you is the car. That's one part of the...
Is that a prediction basically saying?
That's a prediction. I would say that's a prediction that goes into your decision making, but that's probably what the data scientist would be asked to build. But we want to take it one step further, so we have all these different models baked into one, and we have the logic of which decision to take then we get to the decision making.
Maybe you can have another example that helps understand data model, analytical models, decision model. So say I want to build an app where I'm in real time making more, house mortgage loans decisions. So we have now a data model of, who are you as a buyer of the house in relation to, what is your credit rating, what is your income. You have a lot of data points you're collecting. And then maybe you even have some analytical models here. What is your forecasted ability to pay back loans at different rates or whatever. And then we end up in a situation where with someone, you need to make a decision on how much money am I willing to loan this person in relation to this property, in relation to this location. So, so basically it's a little bit like you have a data model, you have data points in many different things that builds sort of the data that you need in order to do something. Then I would argue you have several analytical models that does pieces of the puzzle. And then basically...
What's the difference between an analytical model and the data model?
For me, the way I would describe it is that you have the data model as the core sort of, definition and ontology or whatever you want to call it of the actual, what is the how does the different
like
data
structure, like
yes.
the data how it's structured.
For me,
not something that makes a prediction. In that
no. So a data model, the way we use the word data model at Scania is like model the different data, how they are related to each other. No analytics.
I would call it data structure, but
whatever. So data structure,
data ontology or whatnot.
You need a data structure, and then you have several.
Maybe you also have metadata on top of that, that makes
absolutely.
So you kind of build a representation of your world.
So this is in a way building a representation, the facts sort of thing and how they relate. Then you have a lot of maybe several different things that you are analyzing or predicting, like what is your propensity to be able to pay back and all that. That goes in as a key component. The result of your analytical models, one or several, goes into the fundamental decision model. So and typically if I go to a bank, they have business rule decision models where basically say you need to have, you need to earn this amount of money, you need to have this income in order to be able to, and then if you have 5 children, then you're supposed, we have analyzed that your forecasted cost that you can bear is this. Therefore, all these considered, the decision model then puts a frame on it.
Can I just challenge the whole discussion here a bit and say, isn't all of this just making predictions?
Yes, in a sense it is making predictions, but it's adding the logic of what you're trying to optimize on top of it.
But a prediction can be based from data that you have, put in some kind of model that makes a prediction. It could also be based on rules that you have. Doesn't necessarily be data. It can be heuristic that's placed in a set of business rules, for example. But in some way, you have a way to make a prediction, and that's the prediction model, if you call it that. And that isn't that the only two things that we really have. We have some kind of thing that makes a prediction, some model. Then you have different inputs to that, being heuristic, rules, or data.
I think that's too simplistic, Anders. If I take the example now, that we can use data and people understanding and modeling and structuring the data. And then we have someone who can basically start doing data science to doing different predictions. And we're moving on some sort of trajectory here all the way over to extreme domain expertise on something where you basically, based on your experiences or based on the world, we need to decide on things. So when you come to a topic where you have complex decisions to be made, we are talking now about going from meaningless decisions, automated, simple, RPAs to more cognitive, more complex situations.
Even humans would be part of a model that makes a decision potentially.
Of course, yeah,
or data, or
exactly.
Rules or
so
whatnot,
I think there's a clear distinction here in what I would then refer to as a data model and data structure, modeling the data structure versus modeling the different parts of the analytics to actually.
What's analytics in this case? For me, analytics means something else. That's what I think I'm reacting to a bit.
For me, for me there is like the predictions in relation to single topics. Like if I take the mortgage example, we are talking about the algorithm that predicts what is your propensity to be able to take on cost or whatever. Okay, this is just one component in the end when you are trying to make the aggregated final decision. Should I give this guy a loan? And basically, I will give him a loan, but more importantly, to what interest rate?
Sure.
So it's of course it's all predictions if you say it like that. But I think you're working on different abstraction levels here.
Yeah, but that's what Kahneman is speaking about all the time. You have different levels of abstraction, even a continuous scale, I would argue. So I think even he says that there is not really 2 levels of abstractions here. There is a continuous scale of different levels of abstraction that you make predictions on. But in essence, it's still a way to make predictions based on different things like data, rules, humans, or whatnot.
But I think this is very useful to understand that predictions in relation to predicting, to prescribing things, to recommending things, and if you look into what is the most cited decisioning model framework out there is the OODA model. Have you heard about that?
No.
So OODA stands for, it comes from decision modeling that was from aerial combat dogfighting. So how can we help jet fighter pilots in aerial combat make faster decisions, the correct decisions. And ultimately, why did we need that? In order, everything goes faster and faster and faster, so we need to build these decisions into even how the plane works and all that. So OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, act, loop. Observe what happened with that when we make this decision. Observe, orient, I think, act, decide, act, OODA. So basically here we have sort of a framework for how sort of we can make decisions. So I think there is a different, to say prediction, yes, you're right, everything is predictions, but we are sort of moving into a more and more cognitive and higher level of intelligence in relation to, how we are compounding and making fundamental decisions happen. And I think it warrants its own, I really think it warrants its own.
You could be right. I think it's a good example.
I think another example could be weather forecasts. That's a prediction. It tells you the temperature will be 20 degrees tomorrow, it will rain, and towards the evening it will be sunny or something like that. But what the decision model would do, or a prescriptive model would do, is say, today is tomorrow you ought to sow, or you shouldn't sow tomorrow, maybe, if you're a farmer, because it takes a lot of different inputs into account and turns that into suggestion.
I like that example.
Yeah, it's just, I'm trying to challenge and be a bit controversial here perhaps, but I really like, having really easy to understand definitions of things. And I think one of the broadest definition of predictions, as I've seen, is basically making information you don't have from information you do have. And I think it's a really nice definition. But if you use that definition of prediction, basically everything is predictions in some sense, right?
Yeah. But adding on that, then a decision model would be suggesting an action based on I lost it. Because, building on the prediction definition, can then, and based on that, suggest an action.
Yes. So predictions doesn't have to be actions, but it could be, I guess, and you could add things from a prediction. A prediction could be like, it doesn't have to be about the future. It could be simply what's in this picture. So information you do have is the picture. It's pixel values, basically. What you don't have is what's in the picture. So the picture can say, is it the dog or not? Or hot dog or not hot dog kind of thing. And that's new information, but it doesn't really necessarily say anything about what actions to take.
Yes.
But you could have predictions about actions as well. Yeah. It's just predictions is more general.
Yeah.
But it can be about actions, but it can be about just creating some piece of information that you don't have.
But that's a good example.
I like that.
If you have a model for a computer vision model, the error rate, or the precision and recall, but you can assign different costs to the different failure modes and being correct or not. And if you then figure out what is the consequences of the different failures, you can optimize the model to minimize the cost of failures. And then you have some kind of decision model, because it takes the outcomes, the cost of different outcomes into account.
Yeah, I think it's well motivated here, and sorry for being a bit controversial.
No, it's good. It's really good.
Very helpful.
I think it's, in my view then, the decision making is a type of prediction system that makes some clear actions, a decision to make, compared to other predictions, which is simply perhaps adding some piece of information that doesn't really help you in the decision-making process. And I think that could be a useful definition for what the decision model is.
I like the way you sorted this out for us now, Anders.
Thank you.
Because in one way, it's all about predictions. Yeah. But we are in different stages. And therefore, we get what are the predictions of the best decision to make, and then you can roll back. What are the predictions of these different input valuables that they're relevant?
How far away is the car ahead of us?
Yes, yeah. So it's all about predictions. But in the end, if you relate it back to the driving car analogy, we get to the point where we have algorithms, to help, how we do the whole thing like into the vectors. First we need to observe.
Yes.
OODA is very much fits with the vector space, right? Like first we need to observe, get the data in. Then we need to orient ourselves. We need to build this up in the vector space. Then from here we come to the sort of the cognitive part. We need to then take action. This is the decision-making modeling, and ultimately, based on that action, something happens, right? So I think it's like someone asked, what's the hard part of to Elon Musk? Is it to build the OODA part or the decisioning part? The decisioning part is fairly straightforward if you have the observe and orient.
And if you use traditional, at least in my view, terminology for AI, I would say that you have the perception part, which is going from data to some kind of world model or understanding of the context. From that context, you want to reason a bit about what action to take. And then you take an action and you interact with the environment, and then you get some feedback. And then if you go into reinforcement learning terms, that basically means you have an environment that you act in. Once you act in it, you get some kind of reward, and that is being fed back to the model and continuously being updated. So I think these are basically saying all the same thing.
Yes,
it's just different terms.
But I think this is super. What you gave me a really aha moment here.
Yeah.
Hypothesis. I have said to become data and AI ready, one of the biggest hurdles we have is that we have such a language barrier between the different disciplines.
Exactly. I think it's more terminology.
So here, the AI scientist community has already sorted this out, but in a terminology that doesn't make sense to anyone else than to Anders, or when we sit here and he explains it. No, seriously. For a business person, when you exemplify it, it makes total sense. Yeah. But if you load up the words with no example, what were they?
You have perception and reasoning.
Perception, reasoning.
And that's the two main part, I would say. But then if you add like reinforcement learning terminology, which is different, then you observe the world, and the world being an environment is usually the term that you use. Yeah, and from that term, you have some kind of model that makes a prediction, which is some kind of action to take. You interact with the environment and you get a reward, which is usually the terminology that you get, which is basically utility in your terms.
And I would then argue complete mumbo jumbo for a business person.
Yeah,
complete mumbo jumbo. Perfect sense when you say it. Sorry.
But I think it's not mumbo jumbo to me, but because it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
but
it makes sense to me.
But I would say the reasoning and the suggested action, this is where we say decision model. Yeah. Because if you only have the perception, that's where you only do prediction, and that's...
prediction could be the reasoning part as well, I would argue.
But I think this is quite profound, like that this is one of the core problems. We are very good in our disciplines.
We solved something here in this discussion, and trying to connect two different worlds of terminology, But
I get goosebumps because this is what I have found as like one of my missions, sort of like we have a cross-disciplinary team now, and in order to solve this, we need to find a common lingo we understand each other in. Yeah. And it can only be done by sitting here arguing and then realize we are talking about the same thing, but we use different words.
Yeah. True.
Like so often it's down to ontology or...
I mean, it's a semantic gap.
It's a semantic gap. Yeah. But what is also, you can never solve this if you don't put the different disciplines in the same room, but nutting it out. You can never ever solve this if you don't have the same resources in the same team and building the lingo within the team so they understand what they're talking about. And then it would be helpful if we as an industry started to sort of go a little bit more humble into the different disciplines and trying to, okay, I use these words, what do you use? Can we come up with a common word that we all can agree upon? That would help quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely. But in order to get there, you need to spend time together.
Yes.
And that's a major scarce resource. Time from your daily work to spend in my team, or time from the business people to spend in my team, or vice versa.
But this is a good segue into a more general topics, where I want to start with the first topic now. Based on this whole experience and what happened right now, what can we say about useful ways of organizing data science, AI, and business? You know, are they sort of patterns and anti-patterns that on a general level, and I'm not saying it's easy to politically get it done in a large organization, but just by following the fundamentals of what we said now, can we draw out some organizational ideas around this that we have learned or that we believe in?
It would be fun to hear about how you organize teams and a mix of competences at Tetra Pak and really try to have an as efficient and productive team as possible.
Difficult topic. I think I'd rather argue from a more general point of view, but I think it's so important to have business, or let's say the expert on the topic you're trying to work on in the team, and spending a lot of time in the team, and
this is a domain expert.
Someone
not a data scientist, so to speak.
Exactly. Someone who really understands the domain and what we're trying to optimize and how the domain works, and the politics internally, or what's possible or not, and also someone to take ownership of this once it's built, when we have an MVP, to bring it to the rest of the world.
To value capture.
Exactly, to value capture. And that's not easy. Even though if you get really, really good people in this role, and I have experienced that, we all have a common goal of building a solution for the business. And but even in those cases, it takes so much energy to drive organizational change. So we haven't cracked that, and I'm not sure.
No, but I think we're all struggling here, because we are battling between sort of the discipline expertise and the home of the discipline. So we need to have critical mass around. Okay, if you've never done data science or data engineering before, it's kind of be pretty stupid to have everybody spread out. So there's a logic here that how do we build critical mass around the discipline? But then we get to the core topic of embedding algorithms in the business to capture value for real. And then we need to recognize that, especially in the B2B context or in the enterprise context, when you do an algorithm and you place that in a user, you are changing their normal workflow. If they are going to have value out of this model or whatever it is, it needs to fit into what work you're doing. So whether you like it or not, you are re-engineering their daily work.
Exactly. And then the problem is, am I working against their incentives or for their incentives? Because their incentive setup is really important in terms of my ability to build something that works better for the company.
So we have the core now seen challenge of getting critical mass around the competence area like this, that is maybe new than data science coming into an organization that hasn't done it before, versus the fundamental truth of being close to the business problem and to the business value capture, and to crack that nut on that balance.
So one thing is, of course, as you said before, to just make iterative or incremental improvements to whatever solution you have. And another is to find these kind of innovative new solutions that potentially the mainstream customers or users are not really interested in, but could be the big next thing.
Yeah, and I think that also relates to having new business models, which is not easy. Right. So if you try to go to like package as a service, we don't have it right yet. Maybe we will one day, but it's about taking ownership of the customer's risk. So I will take all your risk, but you will pay me for every package I deliver.
But I recently heard like Amazon's way of doing innovation, and I think I don't agree all the time about what Amazon is doing and their way of solutioning things, but they have some good ideas, and they're apparently very successful companies in some measures, like money. But do you have a way to just capture all the innovative ideas of the coworkers or the people that you have in your organization?
I wouldn't say systematically. I have a list of good ideas. I have as I work a lot with sales, I organize my own projects like sales projects. So I have leads, I have opportunities, and then I make the sell and do a project.
I like that.
So I have a list of I think 34 leads for next year of potential
innovations, improvements.
Yeah, improvements, innovations, or so. Some of them are really big, won't happen next year, but I need to work on them and keep them alive. And some of them are very concrete, very operational, and probably an easy sell. But since it's then incremental change on what we have today, it will also be incremental value.
Yeah.
But
if we go a bit more philosophical now, time is flying away as well, but we can think about, at least if there are two extreme differences in driving value for the world now, not value for Tetra Pak, value for the world, or trying to get closer to some kind of sustainable energy solution that we have in the world, for example. We can think about Tesla is doing it in one way, and DeepMind, that have the goal to create AGI, artificial general intelligence, is doing it in a different way, I would argue. So if we take the DeepMind way, they are basically doing more basic research type of work. They're trying out different solutions into building something that becomes intelligent. It's not really that it provides value. I mean, they started to go in that direction now with AlphaFold and protein folding, and that can have some real positive value short term. But the main way, I would argue, that they are conducting their work is to have more basic research, trying to build up this kind of general intelligence solution somehow that long term ahead, 20 years ahead, will have some kind of big potential benefit. That's one way to do it. If we take the Tesla approach, I would argue that they take the opposite approach. They have some kind of thing that they want to put on the market directly. They have a car that they simply want people to buy now. And then they use it, and they just from that car trying to get more money to continuously improve that car. So long term ahead, it becomes so beneficial to use. People will just switch from gasoline cars into electric cars simply because the functionality of it is so much better, like autonomous driving part, or it could be simply because it's cheaper because they have so efficient manufacturing of it and whatnot. And I would argue that they are doing it from an engineering point of view and also from a business point of view, because it really needs to make sense from a business point of view, whereas DeepMind is going the opposite way. So one is more like basic research approach, the other is more business engineering approach. Do you see approximately what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think one is better than the other, or is it?
I think we need both. We need to be ambidextrous even in this space. I think once you really understand a problem, you can go to first principle thinking and find solutions to it. Then you make experiments. That's something that we didn't talk about. We tried to do experiments in the business and to test our hypothesis. But that only works if you have a hypothesis, right? Or you have done your first principle thinking and have an idea about the solution you want to implement. And for the climate crisis, this could be geoengineering, like putting a lot of certain chemicals in the atmosphere to cool down the Earth as a short-term solution or a stopgap measure. And I think that's probably something we need to do just in order to buy us time to do all the other changes we need to do. But then we also need to do this more exploratory research without a clear goal, because we learn through that process, and without basic research we wouldn't be where we are today. And I think curiosity is probably the main driving force of humans.
But I like a little bit. This is a huge macro topic, but I think you can bring it back down to earth by using the analogy we need to be left-handed, right-handed. So let's iterate what we talked about here, that we need to both be good at, within the business or within any context, the incremental improvement idea.
Yeah.
But it's not enough. You need to have the right-hand side working on the leapfrogging, which is the real innovation, which is different, right? And I've come to a similar conclusion. As a company, you need to build an operating model, an organizational model that is ambidextrous or has both engines running. If you and typically it's happening like you have a startup, it's all innovation, and you get to a certain scale, or you've been around for 100 years. You've gone from into the lives. The S curve is you go to growth, all this maturity. And here we start only incrementing on this because the risk is too high. And here we have the downfall, right? Here we have the Kodak, here we have the fossil happening, right? So how to, in a large corporation especially, be both innovative, the real innovation, and then at the same time be micro-innovative or improvement-oriented. I think it's really the only way. Yeah. And I think that's what you're asking, if it's one is better or the other. I think you need both.
I agree.
And to put a little bit of a dark side of it, I can't remember who said it, but it's really good. It's change isn't mandatory because survival isn't necessary.
That's a good phrase. There's another T-shirt there as well.
Change isn't mandatory because survival isn't necessary. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
I want to end on one topic. One of the reasons we started this AI After Work is a way to sort of demystify AI or to talk about AI, but in another sense, building a strong community. Like getting to know the different profiles, people doing data and AI in different facets, right? From the leaders to the super experts. So, and someone has said it many times. I think, Gilblad from AI Sweden said, "Why do we need AI Sweden?" We talked about this. Because no one can do this alone, right? So, how important do you think the whole idea of community, participating in conferences, peer-to-peer, is for us to sort of move this forward efficiently? And I'm used to put the last framing on this. You've been a very valuable contributor in the Airplane Alliance, which is a peer-to-peer community around data and AI best practices, where we are sharing open source ideas, co-creating on how do we do this, what lingo do we use, what practices do we use. So what's your thinking around this community, on this, the data and AI community, so to speak?
Just speaking for myself, it's absolutely necessary. And I mean, living in the south of Sweden, the data science community isn't that big, and the opportunities for having these creative sessions are also limited in a sense, and we are also in our daily work limited by our project focus. So unless we have these other forums for testing new ideas or bouncing ideas against each other, their change will be so slow. I myself, I think best when I talk and verbalize and communicate with others. And if I sit by myself and try to think, it becomes an echo chamber, and it's really, really hard to I'm not challenged, or and I'm not concretizing my ideas. The only other way I found is to write down my ideas in some kind of notes, building a second brain.
Yeah.
That's the only alternative to having these forums and still developing. And I wouldn't be where I am today without the input from others. I mean, we stand on the shoulder of giants in a sense, or standing on the shoulders of
Each other.
Yeah, it's
Isaac Newton quote.
bit of bootstrapping.
Yeah, but for me, that whole conversation has also been a little about. Sometimes this is a little bit depends on where you work, but if you work in a company with a proud analog history, so to speak, and there are quite few in your discipline.
Yeah.
So then, both for therapy and also sort of for energizing. I think to meet your peers and discuss how did you solve this, or what blockers are we talking? I mean, like, this is the real discussions. Maybe you don't really do them on stage in a conference, but you can do them in shorter, smaller settings. For me, it's also about getting the energy to make this work when maybe you feel misunderstood a lot of times at home because they simply don't have the lingo or the same understanding.
Just seeing that other had the same problem as you have, or have ideas for how to solve them or attack them, and you get energized and get new ideas for how to.
Yeah. So if you have a large community, step one is to have a good community within the company organization, of course, but we don't all have that. So
we're lucky in that way. We're a fairly large group. We're about 20 people, but still, it becomes a. You get on the bandwagon effect here as well. We are kind of have the same conversations over and over internally because of our context and stuff like that. But we are pretty aligned. But it's great to have this conversation with people from the outside that are not stuck in our situation, getting new ideas and new inputs. That's really important.
What's your view here, Anders? I mean, like, if I back up the tape a little bit, I mean, like, you have there's a quite large following of the meetups that was created back in the Spotify days, and I think that meetup group, if you collected that, it would still be a quite big number. Yeah. So what was that story all about? Why did you do that? To recruit.
Yes,
that is
the simple answer. I mean, of course, it's important for any company to have a community for recruitment purposes, but it also is a very, very valuable way to just learn. And I think if we compare it actually to doing a podcast like this, doing meetups is also, or any kind of discussion or presentation, but that is more in a discussion format. That is more like meetup where you actually speak and have time to have proper discussions, is a way of learning that I think is super hard to achieve otherwise. So any type of activity where people are incentivized to have discussions is something that is very surprisingly efficient in developing the mind or learning, what works and does not work. So I think a lot of companies should really try to find at least some channels where they simply do not have a one-way presentation saying, this is my awesome new product, or this is the great new numbers from Apple saying how much we've sold, and abusing statistics. Sorry for bashing Apple here. But that's
your favorite bashing object.
But actually having true discussions that actually have also a really valuable feedback to you as a company. That is, I think, that was a surprising side effect, more or less, of the meetups at the Spotify times. But
and with Airplane Alliance, we've had a very high ambition where we have discussed how we can do co-creation. It's not so easy, but what we have found, and I still think this is very true, like if you find a common topic, like we had an example, we need to better understand the commercial side of the data products, and defining a business role like the business solution owner or the product owner. How does that work? So when you put the problem on the table, and maybe there's one peer that has a very concrete problem at home, and then we are working on that together and trying to actually co-create intellectual property together, I find that an extreme accelerated learning curve beyond discussion. So discussion is great, but when you then try to actually build something or work out something together or put the text together, that really forces you to think and to learn and master the topic. And actually, I think that fosters, without you thinking about it, you're picking up even deeper of the other side of the table, and you understand more facets of the problem because someone else is describing the problem in their context, and then you're contrasting it to your context, and all of a sudden you've gone 360 around the problem from many angles that you could never have met. But the core topic is co-creation like we have found a topic that we want to work on instead of just having So I think there are different levels here, how community can help and actually trying to crack the nut on how to make that really useful. I think it's super important to accelerate what we are doing.
And simply as Daniel Gillblad said, we can't do everything ourselves, and that is so true. And the more we can collaborate inside the company and outside the company, the faster we will build value.
Yeah, I think it's that simple.
Exactly.
I feel that's a pretty good sort of rounding off of this session today. But a couple of classical questions. What's next? What are you up to?
I'm a father of 3 young children, so my planning horizon is like 1 week.
Any fun projects what's on your sales in your sales funnel? What do you want to tackle next?
I would love to get into the package designs and AI and A/B
with
testing.
all the generative AI coming out these days,
exactly.
Imagine if Tetra Pak would do that. And I think you have an amazing opportunity there.
Do you know any other company who has their product in everybody's home?
No, exactly. Right.
So,
But you said it, or someone else said it. Isn't even Tetra Pak is like one of the last printers in the world?
Yeah, one of the largest the largest printer in the world. I'm not, at least in terms of the amount of ink we buy or something like that.
Really?
Yeah, crazy.
You could use it for so much good, I think.
Yeah, I really think so. But it's again a question of building business, innovating on business models and building a product around it. And it's I need to find the right partners within the company.
Can I just challenge one comment there? I mean, what's most important? Is it the customer value or the business value for Tetra Pak that should come first when it comes to packaging design?
It's the customer value, I would say.
Because I think that will pay off business-wise as well, more long-term. But I think it's really dangerous if you optimize for business value short-term. Yeah,
definitely. Right? I mean, unless we solve a customer problem, right? There is no value, sustainable value.
Business model there.
Yeah, right. So that must always come first to understand what problem am I solving for the consumer or the customer.
I think that's one of the things that Amazon actually doing a lot. I mean, they're claiming that they are customer-centric first. That's the only thing that they use to guide their decisions. I hope it's true as well. But still, it sounds really good. And I wish it was true. And it probably is.
Yeah. Last question. Do you have any good ideas of names that you think we should have on this pod?
I mean, you have been around for a while and most of my contacts are in Skåne, but there is my very good friend Mattias Jönsson, who's now at Maersk, who would be brilliant to have on here.
And Maersk was winners in the Dare Awards last year, so they've been doing some good stuff. 2 awards they won at Maersk.
Yeah, so he's in the pricing department.
Interesting.
Is doing
Mattias Jönsson.
Jönsson. Yeah. And then I have a lot of colleagues, of course, within Tetra Pak, but probably be boring to hear the same story again. So, and of course, we in Tetra Pak all look to Casey at Google.
Yeah.
So if you can get her.
Yeah.
Casey, yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Okay.
No
That
problem.
would be brilliant.
Google can sponsor that. Rasmus, awesome. Thank you for having you,
Thank you.
On camera, and now looking forward to have more discussions. And yeah, we have we have more friends in AI after work today. So
We need to have the discussion about consciousness. I was missing that one.
I should have said that before.
no, you okay? All right. But just do it. 10 minutes. Come on.
Okay, very
Okay,
quickly.
good.
What do you think about consciousness?
Wow, that's quickly. I think emergent consciousness is possible in AI or machines, but I think we're far from there yet. But I definitely believe that consciousness is much more common among animals than we think. And of course, it comes down to how we define consciousness.
Do you have
and
a
then-
preferred definition or some kind of descriptive way of describing it?
I don't. I should have read up before saying that just now. But
you cannot put up like a topic like that and then you can pull that.
So let me give a stab at
Yeah.
it and see what you agree and disagree with. So we have spoken about this topic a number of times, but one way to frame it, I think people actually over-romanticize the topic, including Lex Friedman and a lot of other people. I think it's much more simplistic than... At least I like a more simplistic definition of it. So in some way, I would argue it's about being able to perceive the world, the environment, and then take action in it. And that can be a Tesla car. It can even be potentially chess-playing machine. The only thing the environment is about is the board and the pieces that you have on the board. But it can perceive what the positions of the pieces are. It can reason about what action to take, and it can interact with that environment. In that way, it's conscious, not about all of our world, only about a very, very, very tiny, small part. And in that way, it's conscious about that. Would you agree with that?
You have said this before,
I
so
know.
I couldn't sleep one night.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
Right, there is so many, let's say, you have insects, you have animals, you have humans. So if you have to put where AI is right now, so let's say it's bacteria, it's a worm, it's a, I don't know,
Probably somewhere there.
it's a dog, it's a duck, and because how you're explaining it is because it's conscious in its own box,
yeah.
right? So where it is.
A worm is probably a good description, I would say. But it's, we have to quote the Ray Kurzweil here. And I don't think people understand the concept of exponential development. That's why, even if we are at the worm stage today with machines, having exponential development here means that he could be right. It could be 2029 when we actually have super intelligent machines out there. And that would mean that they have a consciousness that supersedes ours. Because even, it's not a linear development. We know it's not linear. So the question is, we shouldn't be, even if we are at the worm stage, we still can have super intelligence in a couple of years or 10 years.
Right. But then it will be a dog.
No, it would
Or a
be
bird.
It would be superhuman.
Right?
So the craziness with exponentiality is, of course, like where are you? Where are we really on this curve? And it's flat, and then all of a sudden you're flat right before it starts really.
Yeah.
So it's like understanding exponentiality is like you count like how many times can you fold the paper and all that, or
And just seeing the explosion of the scaling of AI models now in just recent years, it's truly exponential. You can easily see that if you map that out in whatever chart. It is truly exponential in the size and the scale and the performance of AI models in recent years.
But maybe it's a good slide to make. I think that it would be very valuable to share.
But is consciousness more important to talk about than intelligence? Or is it the same thing?
I was coming to that because I think what you described was more intelligence than consciousness.
I think we can connect the two. I can go into my preferred definition of intelligence as well and consciousness. I think they are different, but I think the same argument you can make for intelligence, being narrow intelligence, can be made for consciousness. So you can have narrow consciousness or general consciousness. I think you can certainly have. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't even say that humans have general consciousness. We have a very narrow consciousness. Just as Jan LeCun says that the human brain is very narrow. So we have human level AI, which is different from general AI. General AI is so much more, and the human brain is extremely limited. I mean, you forget things all the time. You can't do calculus. You can't do so many things. So imagine,
and you're conscious in your own world.
Yeah,
because you don't.
And you only have 2 eyes here and some sensors. The Tesla cars have 8 cameras going in 360 degrees. It can be far more conscious about the world surrounding the car than a human ever could. It's narrow, but it's better. Just as you can have narrow skills, intelligence that supersedes humans in chess easily, or Go, or cars, or doing, understanding X-rays or whatnot. It's easy to supersede humans in a narrow space.
But we have some sort of general consciousness in the relation to like how our neurons fire up and how we sort of learn, constant learning, and so something is happening. Our consciousness is of course transforming. How would you describe it? The consciousness of a baby before it has language. How would you describe consciousness of a 4-year-old? How would you describe consciousness of me, Henrik, as an 18-year-old party man at university?
You actually have a background in psychology. I know Jan LeCun also have a psychology degree, and he often speaks about babies and in the stage that they have before they understand what the mirror is, and that something that is hidden behind a furniture or something will actually appear even if it's blocked or not
and the same can be done with cats and dogs, and they do this experiments with cats and dogs. There is some discussion about that because cats don't react to themselves in a mirror in the same way like monkeys do. But it could also be said that cats are predators in another way. So it's an interesting topic. The mechanical definition you had, I would say that if you have perception and a world model internally, it does sound a bit like consciousness, but there is also a whole field of academia focused on this, and I'm not sure what the current definition there is. But I totally agree with what you said about exponential growth. It's impossible for us to understand it, even though we can describe it intellectually. We still don't act. We don't put our money where our mouth is, as you said. We clearly show over and over that we don't understand it.
Human brain doesn't really compute exponential. We compute linear in some ways, or logarithmic, as you said.
And we potentially are decreasing in intelligence, as some people argue.
What do you mean? Like we don't have to have it in our brain? We have our second brain in our pocket?
No. I literally mean the biological part of our brain is potentially decreasing,
shrinking
in our capacity to be intelligent. But we are enforcing that with, of course, mobile phones, computers, and whatnot that we are augmenting ourselves with.
But Rasmus, why did you want to have a conversation around consciousness? Why is that important, or why is it interesting?
I think these topics are really interesting and to think about. Just as when will we have a general what's it called?
Artificial
AI, general AI, and if we will have it, and they are important topics to think about as well because of exponential growth.
Yeah.
because we will not be ready if it happens. I'm not saying it will happen, but if it happens, we will not be ready because it will happen so fast that we and I think that's a very good point that Max Tegmark do in Life 3.0, that we need to start thinking about this now, because otherwise we will be way behind. And the same happened with we totally knew everything we needed to know about pandemics way back in the past. We were totally unprepared.
Yeah.
And that's also exponential growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that we learned something from the pandemic?
If the same thing happens tomorrow, how different will we react?
If it happens tomorrow, we will act differently. If it happens in 10 years, we will be back to where we were.
Exactly.
Because we are so we can't handle risk that have a low frequency but a high impact as humans. These are the kind of events that will kill us as a species.
It's same as an action, it's a decision. You make a decision. If you don't follow up on the decision,
yeah, and basically we are great at doing decisions around high frequency events, things that happens often, and we can learn quickly. But if we don't get the external feedback, we never take the intellectual knowledge into, we don't internalize it and act on it. Same thing with solar flares. There was a massive solar flare in I don't remember the year now, in the 1800s, where telegraphs started burning and stuff like that. If that happened today, totally unprepared. There is some, of course, some preparedness in the electrical grids are kind of prepared for it, but only to a certain magnitude. Above that, all transformers will be fried. All the big ones that's connected to the grid will be fried.
And that would have imagine what would happen in our society today versus in the 1800s.
Exactly. So let's say all the transistors, some of the big transistors are fried. Lead time for one is 2-3 years. Do you think they have the production capacity to do more, 1 or 2 of these? No, we would be, half the world would be without electricity for very long time.
And in reality, we know this. And we also know that the event of a solar flare, although happen very seldom, probably, it will happen again.
Yeah, it will happen at some point, at some time.
But it doesn't happen all the time, it has sort of fallen back in our consciousness.
So we can model the strengths, we can model the frequency, but since it's not very likely to happen next year, we don't act upon it.
It's always good to plan the good stuff, and the bad stuff are not good to plan on. So that's it. Same as the energy crisis that we have in Europe, but maybe it's a after work topic that we can discuss.
I think we are moving into after work topics now. So, Rasmus, once again, thank you for being here.
It's been great. So happy to finally have come here.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care.